This episode is brought to you by Access Protocol. You'll hear more about them later in the show. Before we get moving on today's episode, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast by either myself, my co-host, or any guests are their personal views and do not represent the views of any associated organization. Nothing in the episode should be construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or any other advice. Okay, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. We are joined today by a special guest, Zano, the other co-founder of Jito. We have Lucas on quite a bit, so Zano, it's a pleasure to get you on, man. Maybe it'd be helpful context to let the audience know who you are.
Cool, yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I got started in crypto a couple years ago, around 2017. Started buying up whatever was listed on Binance. It was a fun time. Kind of got into it because of the whole the cypherpunk in me. Bitcoin made sense, self-sovereignty, like all the basic stuff that like the longer you stay in the space, you seem to kind of like forget about. That's all the stuff that kind of made sense to me early on. I was in school at the time, so I didn't really like dive into any of the engineering or like technical components of crypto. It wasn't until around 2020 when DeFi on Ethereum started to kick off where I was actually like, okay, well, this is like, there's like these quirky apps on Ethereum. Load times are super slow, but it was all super fun too. So I started using it, started learning more about it, started writing bots on EVM chains, and then eventually met Lucas or Buffalo on Twitter through a mutual. And we kind of chatted a bit about Solana. He was already working on Solana. I was looking at Solana. And we kind of came up with this idea for Jito.
You guys, I believe you did a hackathon. Is that right?
That was Lucas. He did I think he did like a decentralized VPN thing on Solana.
Right. So I want to ask, because when you guys first started, I believe you had maybe just hired your first engineer or maybe second. And actually, Lucas reached out to me because I was shitposting a lot back in the day. And he basically asked me to join. And then I interviewed with him. And then me and you were going to jump on a call. And then I was like, sorry, man, I'm just going to start my own company. And then you were like so nice about it. And so that's kind of the earliest memory of meeting you. But I guess I'm curious, back then it wasn't, MEV on Solana was not really a thing. You guys kind of had to predict that it would become a thing, or at least the thing that it is today, which now it's kind of the talking point. You know, Solana MEV revenue regularly, or not MEV revenue, but the combined economic activity, as Dan measures, has surpassed Ethereum a few times. So you guys made a very, let's say, low-key bet that turned out to be quite correct. What was the thought process back then as you guys were thinking through what Jito would be and what problems did you want to solve?
Yeah, I think for me, it was at least simple. It was like, what chain do you think is going to be successful? Ethereum was already kind of seeing success, right? But what's the next chain, right? Like, what's the next chain that's going to be successful? What's sort of like the emerging chain? And whatever chain we think that that's going to be is probably going to have a market for MEV. Because I think MEV is generally a function of user activity and volumes. So it really, like, by building the MEV infra that we did, we're more making a bet on the underlying ecosystem of Solana being successful.
You're the CTO of Jito, for people who don't know. And so you really understand how this stuff works. And the other day, there was news about the foundation pulling stake from people doing private mempools to sandwich people. And even though there's like 10 people on Solana who understand MEV, there were at least 1,000 Ethereum people who know it much better than us, apparently. And so I'm curious, could you just describe the state of MEV on Solana? Like, how are people running these private mempools to sandwich retail?
So, like, at a technical level, some there's this supply chain of transactions. So a transaction originates on a UI somewhere for like a normal user. They send it off, they sign it with their wallet, send it off to an RPC. And then between the RPC and by the time it gets into a block, it's kind of up in the air who sees that transaction. If the RPC is malicious or maybe careless in how they broadcast the transaction to a leader, it could leak. And now basically what that does, if you leak it to the wrong entity, then I guess you see these dark pools or like private mempools where they actually aggregate these transactions. What they do is they then expose those transactions to like a small set of searchers or traders. And now those transactions can be exploited for the value that they leak. So there's like some leak in the pipeline somewhere. It's not clear to me how exactly it's happening or who exactly is doing it, but I think it's a mixture of like intentional leaking and then also just like sort of like careless leaking.
Right. And what do you think the solution is, or maybe it's the least shitty solution to put it realistically?
It's super hard, but one way, I think one approach is, so we're kind of like moving towards PBS, I think, on Solana.
Can you describe what that is actually? Because most people won't know.
Yeah, it's basically, so we're kind of there right now. I'll describe the current architecture and then we can go further down the rabbit hole. So basically right now, 80% of the blocks or 80% of the network runs a Jito Solana client. And what Jito does is we run this off-chain auction for block space access. What that is really is you want to get into a block. You're competing with others to get into the block to access some piece of state that maybe others want to also access. So let's call it a Bitcoin market or maybe an Ethereum Solana market. So you're going to set bids and you're competing with everyone else. And this auction is run off-chain in the Jito block engine. And then the Jito block engine runs some simulations, some combinatorial math, and then decides what the highest profitable batch is of bundles, and then submits that to the Jito leader. So right now, 80% of the network is running this system. And the Jito auctions, so the transactions or bundles that come out of Jito auctions account for around 15 million to 20 million CUs per block. So it's like 30 to 40% of the block. So that's the current state of it. So I think PBS is like that, but on steroids, where the entire block is actually built by this separate entity, as opposed to like sort of like the partial block building model that we have right now.
Ethereum is the first blockchain to really get that robust level of activity where MEV starts happening. And they have been battling the MEV path for quite some time now. And they are in a, MEV enabled this PBS type system. So can you just kind of walk us through, when you look at Ethereum today and their version of PBS, what are the benefits that you see? And then also, like, what are the trade-offs? What are the downsides that have come out of this system?
Yeah, so the good things that came out of PBS on Ethereum, I believe, are there's this notion of sort of like offloading the building of a block to a specialized entity. So building the most profitable block is actually a super hard thing. It's an MP hard problem. You have, you basically have to, you have all the data that's on chain that you're building against, but you're also building against off-chain data, which is like centralized exchanges. So specialized entities may have some alpha where they can actually build more profitable blocks because they run, for example, probabilistic analysis on like what prices may actually converge to off-chain, and then sort of like arb the on-chain prices back to that. So without like actually understanding how the block building process works, in theory, it's like, okay, there's let's just separate out the task of building something that's actually a hard task to do with the process of like proposing and validating blocks. So I think like I think that architecture in theory is much better than the original, where it was like validators not only do they propose blocks, vote on blocks and validate blocks, they also try to build profitable blocks, which they may not be that capable of. Like validators are typically really good infra providers and like DevOps guys, not necessarily traders or HFTs that can build profitable blocks.
What are the leading drivers of value for builders then? Because when we look at on Ethereum, we largely see this notion of SexDex ARB. Ethereum is very ETH, the asset is a large market cap and has a lot of depth on chain as well as on these centralized exchanges. So the ability to arb between things like Uniswap and Binance has historically been quite profitable. But we've also seen this new rise of private order flow. So there's seemingly been these partnerships between Telegram bots that have a lot of what you'd probably call unsophisticated flow from just users smashing trades through their Telegram app and builders kind of getting that flow. How have you seen that dynamic kind of shift and the impact it's had on Ethereum's PBS?
Yeah, so I mean, that's actually really interesting. So going back to the point or the question earlier about what the solution to sort of like private mempools are and like the toxic MEV stuff is, in a way, the private order flow, there's pros and cons to it. So the pro is if you're a Telegram bot, you want to offer to your users, hey, you're not going to get sandwiched through our bot because we only route to builders that we trust, that have reputation, that have been building for like a year or two. And the reason why we trust them is they don't sandwich, and we haven't, like, you can actually see the data and see if they sandwich people and just cut the order flow. So in a way, it gives power back to the users to decide like, okay, I don't care if I get sandwiched, or I do care if I get sandwiched. So then I'm only going to use bots that route to honest builders.
Fragmentation is a huge problem for Ethereum, but also for the subscription industry. We all know the pain of tracking which subscriptions you're paying for and the hassle of trying to cancel them. Well, Access Protocol is here to help with a new way to consume content via staking. It's built on Solana and gives you an easy solution to stay up to date with what's happening in the crypto industry by giving you access to your favorite publishers like CoinGecko, CryptoSlate, and a whole list of independent creators. The ACS token, that's the Access token, is staked to gain access to all of that creator's content without the hassle of having to manage a subscription. If you want to give it a try, check out the link in the show notes to claim a free NFT that gives you access to a creator's content. All right, let's get back to the show.
So what do you think the end state of this looks like? I know like Tolly mentioned multiple concurrent block producers, right? And maybe that's his super theoretical end game. As somebody who is maybe a bit more closer to the metal, what do you think the end game of MEV on Solana starts looking like?
I think in general you have a few block builders that sort of compete on whether it's through auctions or whatever. Like for example, you could have, let's say you have 5 builders. The way you determine who gets to build what block is they bid ahead of time, maybe let's say 100 slots, and they get the next 100 slots, or whatever. They get the 100 consecutive slots that they had won the bid for. But in general, I think it just boils down to like a few sophisticated builders that basically build 100% of the blocks on Solana. I think there's like downsides to that with censorship. So I think that definitely needs to we need to figure that stuff out.
What do you think happens when Firedancer goes live to MEV and just the state of, let's say, economic activity on chain? Any strong opinions, predictions?
I mean, Firedancer is going to rip. So we were, I was looking, I was trying to get a better understanding of how it works. And it's just like, it's probably going to be one of the most high performant open source pieces of code that's ever been published. So it's pretty cool to see. I have no idea what MEV is going to look like with that system, or when 100% of the network is running that and we're actually at 1 million TPS, assuming that there is demand for that.
So you brought up an interesting point there with Firedancer, is just the idea of the network hitting that 100% running mark of this new client. What is the impact when, Like, when do you start to feel the benefits of the network running this faster, stronger, better client in terms of a percentage, right? Because if 10% of the network is running it, is that going to make any sort of a difference? Or I'm just curious if there's like a logical threshold where things change.
Yeah, I think you won't feel any difference. Maybe you'll be able to feel, maybe like the validators will be able to save some costs on the hardware because the code is just more efficient. But really, I don't think you'll feel anything until the 48 million CUs per block limit is increased. Right now, we're like, if you look at block demand or like the amount of CUs consumed in blocks, it's pretty much redlining. I know Mert's probably got this data in front of him, but like it's like 48 million is pretty much like every block is fully consumed. So if we can double that or maybe triple that, you can fit more transactions in a block, and then now your transactions land faster, and you see final like average confirmation times go down.
Yeah, and what's interesting is for doubling, let's say the CUs, it's not apparent that Firedancer is a solution there because, I mean, Trent was telling me yesterday that the bottlenecks are downstream in consensus. So
Right.
like things like SVM, memory, etc. There's a lot of weird stuff that people have done in that code base that people are trying to understand now. So I think once you combine that and then maybe a better networking stack that's not Quick, or at least Quinn, you can start to get pretty interesting. Which actually leads me to maybe the next question, which is one thing that I've always been curious about with the way that Jito does the off-chain auctions is there's a 200 millisecond buffer there, right? And Toli's endgame is something like 120 milliseconds block times. How do you guys, I guess, think about that in terms of how will Jito adapt to lowering block times?
Yeah, I think like so kind of like how Firedancer is a step function improvement over the Agave client. We've also, the block engine has been evolving over time, so the system looks completely different and performs completely different than it did a year ago. Along the way, we've learned like a lot of the high performance techniques that you need to actually like write efficient code and utilize the hardware efficiently. So really, our goal is to also meet those demands, make the auctions shorter. So right now the auctions are around 150 to 200 milliseconds. It's really just a parameter that can get tweaked. So I think 120 millisecond block times is definitely aggressive, but the idea is if Solana can run at that speed, then there's no reason why the Jito block engine shouldn't be able to.
Is it fair to call like the Jito block engine a builder in the current context of Solana?
Yeah, it's definitely like analogous. It's not a full block builder. It's like running. It's only building partial blocks or like only like some of the block. But yeah, it's the best way to probably understand it.
Okay, and so if I was drawing like parallels to MEV boost in Ethereum and the existing Solana infrastructure with the Jito client, it's almost as if like the Jito block engine is the relay and the builder. Again, it's a partial builder, and it's not a perfect analogy here, but I'm just curious how you think about that, like when it comes to like a centralization vector, because in theory, I guess like the block engine could censor a transaction. Now, since it's not the only way to get included to a block, it does feel a little bit different. But I'm curious how you think about the centralization vector of the engine today.
Yeah, I mean, so today there is a separate relay component. There's a relayer that's open source, and validators are encouraged to run their own relayers. We also host relayers. So the way the relayer works, it's Mert mentioned 200 millisecond delay. So that's added at the relayer. So the relayer takes all the transactions, basically applies this speed bump to transactions, delays them, but also that gives time for to the block engine to actually run the bundle auctions. So today, like, there's not really a censorship vector. I think in the world of full block building, you do like that does become an issue, and that should be taken seriously.
And then I just want to close the loop on something we talked about earlier, which is sort of like the cons. And one of them does feel like the builder centralization aspect, as well as where their value, like the value flows in the system. I quickly pulled up what Ethereum block builders have made in the last 24 hours. And it was about 560 grand, which is over about 200 million annualized. And there's some like nuance here, so it's probably not a perfect metric, but I guess the idea is that you could argue PBS shifts the value to is really whoever's controlling this private order flow, and ultimately away from validators. And I'm just curious how you think about that. If like, is that the best end state?
The idea here is that because the private order flow now has this sort of like exclusivity deal with the builder, they have their own backroom deal, and none of that gets shared with the validator.
Right. Yeah. As if I had, this private order flow from a Telegram bot that was like an extra $1,000 worth of priority fees, I'll most likely win that block. And so I kind of have this extra edge, and I'm not really incentivized to give any of that value back to the validator, because nobody else can really compete with me since I have this private order flow deal.
Right. I don't know. I could see the other side of the coin where it's like, so MEV kind of warps the economics of the chain. And sort of in that model, now you have a more, I think the validator revenue is a little more smooth and less spiky with MEV. It's not clear to me whether that's good or bad for the network yet. I do think like generally like more revenue for validators is good. That incentivizes more nodes to come onto the network. But it's not clear to me if like that architecture is specifically worse.
I guess the last point there is just, when we look at Ethereum again today, there's 3 builders that win 75% plus of the blocks. And I think Titan's the last one that isn't censoring. I'm not 100% confident there. And that would shift like censoring to not censoring to like basically 90% of blocks would be censored if Titan woke up one day and said we have to censor. Right. And so how do you think about that vector more deeply?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the issue. I think, and I think every chain that converges towards PBS is going to have those issues. I know Ethereum's looking to solve that with, they have this term for it. It's, is it inclusionless, I believe, where you can kind of like force inclusion or force inclusion of certain wallets.
Yeah, I think it's like the idea that the proposer says, hey, I saw these transactions, and if you're going to build me a block, like they need to be in there.
Yeah, which is like, that's an interesting approach to solving that. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Like we're building these things literally for the first time ever. And Ethereum's, I think they're a couple steps ahead naturally. So it's good to see the mistakes they're making and the things that are working out for them and leveraging that to our advantage.
So something that maybe Ethereum isn't so far ahead on is restaking, right? That is kind of converging. Well, they're obviously ahead on it, but there are attempts being made on Solana by multiple teams. I know you guys have been mentioned to potentially be interested in that area as well. What are your whole thoughts on that?
So I was originally on the fence about restaking when it first came out. Like I'm naturally sort of like questioning anything that gets a lot of hype without any actual, like anything actually being shipped and used. But I think like the general idea behind it makes sense. I actually don't really like the term restaking. I think something like modular consensus is probably more appropriate. Because like, what are you really doing? You're deploying some rules around consensus for this external thing, like this external network, and it could be an L2, it could be an Oracle network, it could be anything that needs to basically have some slashing and like staking rules. And you're just coding that on chain and then having that network plug into it. Whether the asset that's securing the thing is like restaked SOL or USDC is actually like just an implementation detail of that specific AVS or network that's being secured.
It's not very aligned, but The one thing that also this kind of ties into is what you guys call StakeNet, I believe. Can you tell the audience who might not be familiar with what StakeNet is, what it is, and how it works, and what it's intending to become?
Yeah, so StakeNet is so basically I think it was around last breakpoint, which was like sometime before November. Lido shut down their stake pool in Solana and just completely just left for whatever the reason they wanted to, and that was it's kind of an issue, right? You're staked to this protocol. You think it's on chain, so like lasts forever, and it's perpetually running. But really, that's not the case with stake pools before StakeNet. Basically, you are dependent on that team, which is 5 or 10 people centrally located in some jurisdiction to continue running the protocol. And if they decide to pack up and leave, that's it. You have to either be aware of that, on top of it, to move your funds out and hope that they give you like a UI to actually withdraw your funds and do all that. So that's an issue. Basically, StakeNet solves that. Solves the issue of a stake pool being dependent on a team to run it. So the way StakeNet works is it's backed by this validator history program. Validator history is it uses data derived from the chain to actually it's like a database for validator performance and other metadata around validators. There's some data that isn't actually derived from the chain where you probably need some sort of like consensus on the actual data. So let's like, for example, IP and geolocation. And that's the piece where it's actually evolves into like an AVS on a restaking network could make sense, because now you're coming to consensus on some piece of data that needs to get pushed on chain. And then there's this other component, which is the steward program, that leverages that data that's on chain and then scores validators and then auto delegates and redelegates and rebalances the stake pool. And anyone can crank these functions. So obviously Jito is going to run a bot to crank it, but then it's permissionless to crank because all the data is just fed into it from the chain. So the idea is now the stake pool can like forever get rebalanced and continue running without actually being reliant on Jito Foundation.
And to tie those two things together, you mentioned that there could be an interesting way to, because you are coming to consensus over this database, it could be an AVS. The thing that I struggle with on the restaking side right now is a lot of these things are like, okay, yeah, because I agree with you, you're coming to consensus, or it makes sense, but you have to pay for that service, right? And like, where would the fees come from in this situation to like pay the restaking provider?
So, I mean, what it's making money, right? Off the stake pool. So there's some revenue going into the Jito stake pool, and Jito stake pool is dependent on StakeNet, so it can perpetually run. So you take a piece of that and you can use that to incentivize the AVS around it. There's also, like more generally, let's say like this wasn't a Jito Foundation thing, just some general stake pool that wanted to run StakeNet, they could actually use their own governance token as rewards to actually keep it running.
No, that makes sense to me. And the other thing that I've heard you mention would be an interesting AVS is actually this auction engine. So maybe that's a good segue to jump into. There's two types of auctions that you've described. One is like just in time, where each block or each slot you are bidding on who's going to build it, versus basically what looks like more like a block space futures market where you're purchasing the block space ahead of time. Maybe if you could explain each of those in full, that'd be a really helpful point of context.
Yeah. So generally, just in time is how things are being ran right now through Jito. I think they're a little more efficient in pricing things. So you have the state of the world with the just in time auctions. You know what the price on Binance, what the price across different exchanges are, and so you're able to price or actually quote your bids correctly, as opposed to when you're bidding ahead of time. Now, and there might be, this might be a whole nother, there might be a whole nother group of people that are actually just good at sort of like predicting prices. But it's a little harder to price. So the further out ahead of time, like, if I was to price blocks in a year from now, I have no idea. I couldn't even give you like a rough estimate. But if you say, hey, like a week from now, I could probably say, oh, what are the chances that blocks look like what they've looked like for this past week, and then give some discount and probably give you a better estimate. So that's the trade-off, is like just in time is you get more efficient pricing, but on the engineering front, it's a lot harder because it's real time, and Solana is running super fast, 400 millisecond block times, 200 millisecond auctions. Just in time, maybe a little easier on the engineering side, but economically, it's a lot harder to model.
And fun fact is that Jito stands for just-in-time ordering, I believe.
Yeah, it's so we kind of retrofitted it. Jito sounded cool, and then we were like, all right, let's make it make sense.
My friends, big news. Blockworks is hosting Permissionless 3 in Salt Lake City this year, so we're heading west for 3 days starting October 9th. Permissionless is our industry's premier DeFi event that brings together crypto natives from all over the globe. I've personally been the last 2 years and can honestly say that the attendees are incredible. It's people who actually care about crypto. We'll also have more than 200 industry titans speaking at the event, and this includes builders like Lucas Bruder from Jito Labs and Brian Pellegrino from Layer Zero, or investors like Kyle Samani and Joe McCann, and even elected officials like Representative Tom Emmer, who is fighting the good fight in Washington. And it's narrative season, so we're going to be covering the 7 hottest themes in crypto. This includes things like modularity and restaking, or Bitcoin and L2s, and even AI and crypto. The goal is to keep you up to speed on major developments in the industry. Ticket prices will be structurally increasing over time, so get your ticket today. For my Lightspeed family, I got you. We're going to use code Lightspeed10 in all caps, no space, for 10% off your ticket. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at Permissionless 3, and let's get back to the show.
So we talked about Jito. Let's talk about Solana overall, and then use that to kind of go higher in the stack. You've been building on Solana since a long time, and you've seen it evolve, and the demographic and the tech evolve. What are your current thoughts on the state of the infrastructure of Solana? What are the biggest problems that you see that still need to be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, on the infra side, at least what I'm hearing from dApps is they really just care about landing transactions and reading data. So reading Solana data is super hard. Like block explorers are still trying to figure that problem out, I think. It's, even I get tripped up sometimes looking at some of these transactions. So I think that's figuring out those two things, which are like the most basic things a blockchain can offer, is like, all right, make the reads easy, and then also the writes, make those deterministic and easy for dApps.
Yeah, people would be surprised at how difficult both those things are on Solana currently. And in terms of the apps that you're seeing out there, do you pay attention to that at all? Like, what kind of apps are being built? Any particular ones that you'd like to see more of?
Yeah, man, I'm a shitcoiner at heart. So I do like, I think DeFi is important. Like sort of like you want to have on-chain perps, stuff like Drift. I think that's super important. Basically, like if you wanted to trade perps from the US, I don't know if it's even legal or possible, but with on-chain perps, it kind of gives access to the world, to those instruments. So I think that stuff's super important, like just decentralizing finance and giving access to everyone. But then all the fun stuff around meme coins and, like the shit corners. I think like, things like Pumped Out Fun have really surprised me. Is like that and Telegram bots. I did not expect Telegram bots to be as popular as they have become this cycle.
Yeah, I still haven't used one. I'm actually not quite sure what they do still. Like, do you just trade on Telegram and with commands or some shit?
I haven't used it. Dan, have you?
Yeah, you just type like long bonk or whatever it may be. And you can do some other like tools on them now. So it's not just trading, where you can like snipe new token launches and things of that nature. So I don't personally think it is useful, but I mean, I can see why it's fun, right? It's just an easier way to mess around and gamble at the end of the day. But it's hard for me to believe that like this many people are using it. Like, again, going back to the Ethereum side of things, like the order flow that certain builders receive from certain Telegram bots is like changing the MEV and block building landscape. And even things like BonkBot, I think their default slippage was like 20%, right? And so you see these crazy transactions come through, which is why, sandwiching, I guess, was so rampant, is because there was these Telegram bots doing really stupid things and like putting their users in front of a 18-wheeler.
Yeah, there's a new account that's my favorite on Twitter called the Slippage Monster, and he just tweets gobble gobble at all these Telegram bots. It's quite interesting what the second order effects of that are.
Justin Drake and Toy were the famous debate of late, and Justin Drake had an interesting comment that actually he called Solana like immature in the context of being underdeveloped for not having PBS. So one, I'm curious if you agree with that. And then two, I want to get into timing games. We do see this happening today in real time on Solana. Data Always has some great stats on the impact of this. So I'm curious if you think timing games are happening on Solana today, or if in a PBS future that will accelerate.
I mean, on the immature comment, I think it's a bit. I mean, you could call Ethereum immature for only running whatever TPS. What is it, like 13 a second, or 13-second block times? So I think like I wouldn't call Solana immature for that reason. I would say like Solana is constantly evolving. So you could say it is immature in that it will never mature and it will constantly evolve and get better. I do think, though, PBS is probably where it should converge. And then what was the second part?
The timing games. Like, are we seeing any of that on Solana today?
Yeah. So I believe, I don't know if this is still the case because of a recent SIMD that passed. There's like timing games around votes. I don't know if that sort of falls under that category. What do you think, Mert?
Yeah, it kind of does. It's more of like a APY boosting trick for validators as opposed to MEV, but it's a timing game nonetheless, or it was.
Yeah. I don't think I see any of that. I do, like, in theory, I think I think Justin was right in that, like, if you delay up until the last second, you have a larger worldview of what's going on. And this is kind of like what the Jito auction does, right? It's delaying packets for a little bit to give searchers and traders a wider view of the state of the world, or the pending state of the world, as opposed to like if you're continuous block building, like Solana is, how the vanilla client is designed for, you have like, I don't know, maybe 5 milliseconds worth of data to actually optimize for.
And do the shorter slot times on Solana like make this, like magnify this, if you will, right? Because let's say you can play a timing game and you get 200 milliseconds with a 12-second block time, the marginal change of 200 milliseconds isn't really proportionally that much. But on Solana with 400-second slot times, if you still have that same 200 millisecond ability to delay, you've increased your time of that slot by about 50%. And I'm curious how that plays a role here, because I feel like it's two-sided in that, yes, proportionally it's much larger, but because the slot times are shorter, there's likely less MEV. But I'm just curious how you think about this.
Yeah, I think so. What I was understanding from at least that conversation, and how I do understand it, is that yes, there's less MEV, but the edge that you're getting requires so much more engineering and sort of like infra. There's like a larger barrier to entry to get that small of an edge. But it is still an edge. It's just harder to get that edge.
Okay, I'm going to shift the topic. One thing that I saw recently was the CK Sync airdrop, and some wild comments about that on Twitter, which reminded me that Jito was really the one protocol that kicked off the airdrop meta on Solana. Arguably the only ones that did it well. I am an investor, so just goes without saying, but I did think it was done quite well, and it kind of kicked off this effect on Solana for more teams to do it and more liquidity and whatnot. How did you guys, first of all, what do you think about the airdrop meta that kind of commenced afterwards? And how did you guys think about going with your approach?
I think why the Jito airdrop was successful. I think it caught everyone by surprise. So there was much less Sybils, and no one was expecting anything. So when you're not expecting anything and you get something, it's great. Now everybody that uses these protocols is expecting large airdrops, and then they get an airdrop and they're like, oh, it should have been more, and then they're not grateful for it. But it is cool that that we had some part in at least kicking off, I guess, like what went on to be sort of an epic run for Solana.
Yeah, little humble, but yeah. And okay, so I want to now shift again. We have roughly 15 minutes to maybe some more high level stuff, which is to say Jito is likely like a top 5 protocol in all of crypto by my estimation in terms of impact, which to make that work, you obviously need some small group of people dedicated to some mission, a startup. What are some lessons you've learned about building startups as you guys have built this company from the ground up?
Yeah, I've learned, I think more on the sort of like leadership side is really like if you want things to happen, you have to make things happen. And the way at least I've learned to make things happen is by doing those things myself, and sort of like leading by being in the trenches with my team. The other like subtle thing is like doing the thing right away. So like, I get so many emails and Telegram messages, whatever, rather than like reading and being like, all right, I'll get back to that or respond to this person, or do this like mundane task later. It's just like, do it right away. Just knock it out. Which is like a subtle thing, and seems kind of obvious when I say it, but it is something that's helped me a lot.
You guys have also hired arguably some of the best engineers in the field. How do you think about hiring and recruiting people? What are some tips for success that I can steal from you?
Yeah, I mean, we tried getting you, so tell us where we went wrong there. I think I don't know. Hiring it's been tough. We've been lucky in finding the people that we have found and built the team and the culture the way we have. But we've been kind of picky along the way. Is like, I know people have different approaches. Like some teams do trials, others do like sort of hire fast, fire fast. We kind of went the route of all right, we'll spend like 3 to 4 months on a search and really try to find a good engineer, but not just a good engineer. To me, like culture is also very important, especially in the early days, because in the early days, you're really just a group of friends building this thing. As the team starts to grow and the company starts to grow, the culture becomes less important, because now like you've set the culture and they can kind of like mold into the culture because now it's set by everyone. But in the beginning, like your first 3-4 hires, it's like, all right, are they a good engineer? That's like table stakes. Everybody must be at least a good engineer to even have a conversation with. And then it's like, now do they mesh well? Do they work as hard as we expect them to? And yeah, will we all get along the way? Because like, I think that's super important.
So you guys are maybe a little different than a lot of other crypto products, just given a lot of what you do is infrastructure, but you do have like that consumer-facing LST in Jito Soul. And so I'm curious how you think about the importance of marketing and distribution. There's one end of the spectrum where build it and they will come, and this like don't prioritize it at all. And there's the other one that is sort of this like extreme, pay every KOL in the world a gazillion tokens and see what happens. And I'm just curious where you fall on this spectrum and like how the proper way to execute a strategy would be.
Yeah. I think that's actually probably the hardest problem to me is the distribution piece, because you see a lot of products get built. I think on the technical side, like I feel comfortable building pretty much anything, but then it's like, now you have to go and sell that and make it actually work as a business. I think at least on the MEV system side, where it was like our customers were searchers, traders, and then also validators, it was kind of a chicken and egg. It's like you need stake for the system to actually be valuable to traders, but you also need traders and searchers for the system to be valuable to validators. So in the beginning, it was really just tough, like cold starting the system, and really it was just like building trust with validators to run. Because if you can get 80% of the network to run your piece of code on like a $70 billion network, then like there's got to be some like good business relationships there and like trust involved. On the consumer facing side, I think the foundation's done a great job at sort of like piggybacking off the mission of like the broader mission of increasing staker rewards through MEV, and a more like fair redistribution network of that, while also trying to grow the entire pie for liquid staking tokens. Like it's still a very small percentage of the total number staked. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it's like 7%, maybe 7 to 10% of total staked assets are in liquid staking protocols, maybe even less than that. So there's this like, you want to increase your slice of the pie, but like you should also, when the overall pie is that small, you gotta increase the overall pie.
I have two final questions. One is, we talked about trust, and you guys have been able to gain a lot of trust with the validator community, which is something that most Ethereum people, when you guys announced that you're shutting down the mempool, didn't realize, because Solana doesn't have a mempool natively. And so it'd be super hard for somebody to come in and replicate basically 80% of stake running one client. That's super difficult. That was a super controversial decision at the time, the mempool stuff. Looking back, what do you think about it? Do you think it was the right decision? Any things that the ecosystem, not you guys, could have done better?
I think it was a step in the right direction, and I think like generally it's important that we don't fall down sort of like the Ethereum mindset of accelerationism. I think like to an extent I can see where like being an accelerationist makes sense, but when it's like, when the network is getting off the ground and running, like Solana is relatively new. We're still trying to make it the best place for people to trade, to buy NFTs, to do everything. So it's super important, especially in the early days, to not screw those same people over that you're trying to bring onto the chain. So like with that being said, is like, if you have the levers and knobs available to you to shut things off and run experiments and see if things work, then you should do it, and not be like, oh, well, this is an architecture that like a few researchers and I decided is the best way for like this network to run. So we're just going to go with that and stamp on that forever. So I think like generally I like the idea of us and the network being flexible and trying things that work, and maybe some things don't work.
Cool. Okay. I did save the most important question for last, so get ready. But a lot of people have been wondering, what exactly is your beard routine? How do you grow this thing? What do you use to maintain it? Like, give us the tips.
So it used to get really dry, and that was my issue. So my wife started making this like it's coconut oil mixed with what's the other thing? It's slipping my mind.
He's got the secret recipe. That's what this is.
Yeah. I'll text it to you, but it's basically coconut butter mixed with some stuff, and then that's pretty much it. I just rub it in, and
She makes it in-house?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That could be a good business.
Yeah. Also, minimize like shampoo use.
And like combing and...
You want to comb, but minimize like any sort of commercial hair product use.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. That is some good shit.
All organic.
Zano, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. Thanks a ton for coming on. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
Stake your soul. Buy your shit coins on Solana and have fun. Don't get rugged.
Amen to that. Well, thanks again for coming on, man. We'll put that talk to your research. You'll put the link to the research day talk in the show notes, as well as your Twitter. Segfault Doctor. Absolute pleasure, man. Cheers. Have a good one.
Thanks, man.